Good morning. John just said to me, it's tough to follow babies, right? I mean, how in the world how do you top that? Man, that's awesome. Congratulations to you families. We're so thrilled for you. So I want to start this morning by asking a question, and this is kind of an all skate, as John said. You get to participate, just raise your hand, because this week was full of choices. You got to make all kinds of choices in your adventure this week. So how many of you went to school this week? How many of you got to go to school? Notice they said got to, not have to. Yeah, privilege. Yep, privilege. How many of you did some homework this week? Okay. How many of you read a book this week? This adults? It's just teenagers? Yeah, adults. Yeah. How many of you prayed this week? Any prayers? How many of you made your bed this morning? Oh, a few of you. How many of you brushed your teeth? No, you don't have to answer. Oh, okay. How many of you got a package from Amazon this week and you had no idea what was inside of it? All right. Man, in all those choices and more, you got to choose your best adventure this week. And I don't know if you've ever thought about it before, but the choices you made this week had an impact even on who you are today in these moments. That's what we've been talking about over the last month in our series, Choose Your Best Adventure. We've been talking about how to make choices, and not just any choices, because anybody can make any old choice. We want to make wise choices. We want to make good choices that will lead us to good places in life. And if you're with us for the first time, welcome. We're so glad you're here, and you missed a whole bunch. So today we're bringing this series to a close, and my best advice to you would be go online to our website, icommunitychurch.com, and you can watch, you can listen, you can catch up on everything that we've been talking about today, or everything we've been talking about through this series. But today we're going to bring it all to a close, and we're going to talk about when our adventures come to an end. Because all of our adventures will come to an end. In fact, in the United States, currently the mortality rate's hovering around 100%, and it doesn't seem like it's changing anytime soon. So at some point in time, all of our adventures will come to an end. And so I want to spend some time talking about that today, which is kind of sad to think about, especially as we were talking about babies here just a couple minutes earlier. But to begin our discussion, I want to give you kind of our random group of people. And you're going to think it's random, and I want to see if you can figure out how they all tie together, okay? So here's the first person: Moses, Betsy Ross, Abraham Lincoln, Adolf Hitler, Mother Teresa, and your mom or your dad, or both. What do they all have in common? You probably have no idea. You're like, where is this going? I'll tell you what they all have in common. That is that they all left a legacy. They all left a legacy. They're not all dead. Some are famous, some are not famous, but they all left a legacy. And so for the purposes of our discussion today, I want to just give you kind of a definition of the word legacy. It's what you leave behind. It's what you leave behind. We all leave something behind. It's like an imprint in cement, right? I mean, if you put your hand in or foot, I mean, it stays there. It hardens, and we all leave something behind. We leave something behind during transitions in life. Whether you're graduating from school or you did graduate from school, when you move to a new community, when you leave a job, we all leave legacies everywhere we go. And then especially when we get to the end of our days, we leave a legacy. Now here's something that is kind of exciting, and here's the good news in this discussion, that you get to choose something really important in your life. Something that maybe you haven't even thought about that you get to choose, and that's that you get to choose what kind of legacy you're going to leave. Now notice I didn't say you have to choose, but you get to choose what kind of legacy you're going to leave. Have you ever thought about that before? Have you ever thought about the kind of legacy you're going to leave behind you? Now I've got a couple hunches about you, and I have these hunches just because they're true of me, so I'm assuming that you probably fall along the same lines, maybe not. My first hunch is that you probably haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the legacy you're going to leave, which is a bad thing, because throughout this series we've been talking about how life is connected, and today connects to tomorrow, which connects to the next day, which connects to the next day, on down the line till the day we die, right? And so my guess is, as much as it would be a good thing to think about our legacy, most of us were not really thinking about our legacy. But if you were to die today, if you were to be gone today, or move on in life from something else, or to another endeavor, whatnot, what would people say about you? What would people say about you? Have you thought about your legacy? What would you want people to say about you? Have you thought about that? I mean, what do you hope people would say about you? And do those two things line up? Because that kind of leads into my second hunch. My first one is that, that you've not thought a lot about our legacy or your legacy, but my second hunch is that you want to leave a good one. I mean, we probably all want to leave a good legacy. If you've ever been to a funeral for somebody who didn't leave a great legacy, that is a depressing funeral to go to. In fact, one of my first years when I was working in the church, I was a pastor of students, and I got to run sound for a funeral. And at this funeral, it was a person that I didn't know particularly well, but people got up to try and share something nice about a person that there wasn't a lot of nice things to say about. And they'd talk about, Dad was an angry guy, but we knew deep beneath his crusty exterior that he loved us somewhere deep down in that cold heart of his. I mean, it's this awkward sort of thing where you're trying to, what in the world? And so I mean, I know we want to be able to get to the end of our days and leave a good legacy. And so the real question, and the thing that I hope you'll think about with me this morning, is what kind of legacy are you going to leave? When you move on in life, when you pass from this earth, which we're all going to do at some point in time, what will people say about you? Because at some point in time, people will be talking about you. In fact, it could be that that's the day they talk more about you than they ever talk about you any other day of your life. So what in the world would people say? What we want them to say and what they would say are sometimes two different things. And so I want to spend some time today kind of asking ourselves the question, how do we ensure that we get to the end of our adventure, or get to our deathbed and say, that was an adventure worth living and a legacy worth leaving? How do we get to the end of our time here on earth and answer those questions? It was an adventure worth living and a legacy worth leaving. And so we're going to talk about that this morning. Now, I can just imagine in a room like this, there are a couple groups of people. One group of people is the young people who are just kind of starting out your legacy making, right? You're in middle school, high school, maybe you just graduated, or you're in college or young 20s, and you're thinking to yourself, legacy? What in the world are you talking about? I just want to live life and have fun and live it to the full, and I'm just trying to survive high school or middle school, whatever it is, lunchroom, that's the world that I'm living in, and I get that, and I hear you saying, this may be the most irrelevant sermon I have ever heard in my life. Okay, I get that. So if that's you, I want to invite you to really lean in and pay attention today, because it may seem irrelevant, but it has such an important impact on who you are. Because for the first time ever, this is fascinating, because generations before you, and you're too young to know this, but generations before you used to look to older, wiser people as they figured out how to live life. But in our current world now, and I don't know what is going on, can we turn this down just a little bit? Thanks. In our current world now, it's different, isn't it? I mean, instead of looking to an older generation, for the first time, we grew up with the internet. And so where do you look? Siri, Alexa, the Google. I just said the Google because it sounds funny. But Google, so we go to these artificial intelligences to find answers to important life questions. For the first time ever. I mean, generations before, they didn't have to do that. They didn't have the opportunity to do that, but now we do. And so we're looking to an artificial intelligence to help us figure out how life is connected, but it can't help you figure out how life is connected. It can answer questions, but, along the lines of how to fix your washing machine or how to repair something on your car, but it's not going to help you fix your life. And so as much as, we kind of lean into those things rather than leaning into the older, wiser generation that leaves a legacy. And so if that's you, again, pay attention. There is some good stuff for you in this today. We're going to invite you into that. The second group of people, so that's kind of the young people. Then the second group are those who are maybe at the end of your legacy making. You're kind of reaching the end of your days here, and maybe you're looking kind of at your life and you're saying, I don't even know if I have that much legacy to leave. And the invitation for you is to lean into this too, because I guarantee you, just because of the fact that you have experienced life for a season of time, you have a legacy. You have experience, you have knowledge, and therefore hopefully you have some good judgment. And your job and my job is not to fill the cup of the next generation. That would be impossible. Our job is to empty our cup into the cups of others. Our job is to do what we can to leave a legacy for the generation that comes behind us and to invest into the lives of those who follow after us. And it's an incredible invitation for every one of us. And maybe you're somewhere in the middle, you're still making your legacy, or you're ready to end your legacy, and you need part of your legacy is investing into the next generation. And so today we're going to take a look at a piece of scripture that comes from a book in the Old Testament of Proverbs where Solomon, who was considered the wisest man to walk the earth, he instilled wisdom into the next generation, into his sons, because he felt it was important that they would know how to live life and how to leave a legacy that was worthwhile. And so if you got a Bible, I want to invite you into that. We're going to be in the book of Proverbs, as I said, chapter 4. If you didn't bring a Bible, we'll have it here on the screen in just a minute. Now, I just want to tell you this as we kind of read through this. Solomon was the son of King David. Most of you probably know David, who slayed Goliath. And Solomon's considered the wisest man next to Jesus who ever walked the earth. And so he has some really important things. In fact, what he's going to tell us is that my wisdom comes from the generation before me, and their wisdom came from the generation before that. In other words, it's being passed on, and so I see the importance of passing it on to those who come after me. But the other thing you're going to notice as we go through this is there is a lot of repetition. In fact, I'm not going to read every verse from Proverbs 4. I'd encourage you to spend some time this afternoon, but if I did it right now, you'd be like, didn't you just read that? Didn't you just read that? He just says it 10 different ways. And so because of that, even in this message, you're going to feel a little bit of repetition, but I promise we're going to get to a point, and it's going to make it there, and I think we'll all be better off if we can pay attention to what Solomon has to say to us. So Proverbs chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. He says, "Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you this sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching." In other words, he's kind of saying, look, there are all kinds of sources for knowledge in this life. There are all kinds of sources. In fact, in our day and age, we'd say there are infinitely more sources than even they had 3,000 years ago. But he says, of all those sources, I want you to pay attention. I want you to listen. Listen to what I want to invest into you, because at one point in time, I was your age. At one point in time, my father sat me down and we had this talk, and he began instilling his wisdom into me, and now I'm ready to pass it on to you. This is part of my legacy. Now, I realize some of you maybe didn't have the greatest father relationship, or maybe your father wasn't very wise, and so it might be a little difficult to relate to this, but just imagine if you had a wise father, a caring father, a loving father who wanted to instill and pass on to the next generation, because that's exactly what Solomon is doing in these words. So he says, "Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction." Then verse 6, he goes on, he says, "Do not forsake wisdom. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you." In other words, he's saying you need to ensure that wisdom is the way in which you look at the world. You need to think about wisdom, and you need to look at the world through the lens of wisdom. Now, I realize you may be thinking, what is wisdom? What is wisdom? Let me give you a definition, because we talked about this at the beginning of our series, but in case you weren't with us, we said wisdom is the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. It's the quality of having experience. You've got some time under your belt. And because of that experience, you were able to kind of look at the world a little bit differently. You gained some knowledge. You began to understand how the world works. And because of that knowledge, you had better judgments. It doesn't make a person perfect. It doesn't make one person better than another person. Wisdom just says, I've learned from my journey, and I'm continuing to learn on my journey, and I'm putting into practice the things that I'm learning. So he says, you need to have wisdom. Pay attention. Don't give wisdom up. It will lead you to a life worth living, a legacy worth leaving. Verse 7, he said, the beginning of wisdom is this, which is a little strange and it's not very helpful. It says, here's where you start. If you want to get wisdom, right? That's the beginning of wisdom. Get wisdom. Though it cost you all you have, get understanding. Now, how many people find that unhelpful, right? Okay, what in the world are you talking about? I was like, okay, Solomon, if you told me to get money, I could probably figure that one out, or get a job, or get better grades, or get, I can get all those different things. But wisdom is this ethereal sort of thing, and it's a little bit complicated, and you may be a little bit confused about what exactly is he even saying. And we're going to get to that in the end here, but here's a piece of what he's saying. If you want to have wisdom, it doesn't require you to be smart, which is a good thing, right? For some of us in here who don't feel very smart. Don't worry about it. If you're in here like, I'm dumb, that's good. You don't need to be smart to get wisdom. Do you know what else you don't need? You don't need to come from a certain family or have a certain background. You don't have to have a special pedigree in order to get wisdom. Do you know what you need to get wisdom? You just have to want it. You just have to want it. And here's what I know about you, again, because I know it about me. When I want something, I get it. When I want something, I get it. Whether it's a new job or whether it's a new car or a house or, you want to get married, whatever it is. I mean, when you know what it is you want, make the team, you get it, and you do whatever you need to do to get it. Even if it involves rearranging your finances in a way that's unwise. Even if it involves moving to a new community, even if it involves breaking off a relationship or saying yes to a job offer, whatever it is, what we want, we get. And so Solomon says, you need to take wisdom and you need to think about it in terms of, if I could get it, I will do everything possible in my means to get it. I need to center my life around wisdom. And here's why: because more than any other thing we could pursue, the pursuit of wisdom has the power to help us choose our best adventure. That's why get wisdom, pursue wisdom, go after wisdom, rearrange your life if you have to get wisdom. Now, some of you in here, you may be thinking, this is church, and shouldn't you talk about Jesus? Isn't that what you should pursue more than any other thing? And the answer to that is kind of, yeah, but this was written 1,000 years before Jesus walked the earth. And Solomon actually tells us that wisdom was built into the foundation of the world, which implies that it leads us to God. It will lead you to Jesus. And so it's not excluding Jesus. The point is that you have to make it so central in your life that you will do anything you could possibly do to attain it. Get wisdom above all else. He goes on, he says, listen, my son, accept what I say, and the years of your life will be many. It's going to lead you to a fuller life. You'll leave a worthwhile legacy. He says, I instruct you in the way of wisdom and lead you along straight paths. These are not theoretical. Straight paths were morally straight. They were straight from years and years in the past. It's kind of the wisdom that's been passed down by generations. They're not going to take you in any awkward way. They're going to be morally straight, practically straight. There's a practical piece to this. It's not just knowing it up here, but it's living it out. He goes on, he says, when you walk, your steps will not be hampered, and when you run, you will not stumble. Now, I don't know about you. Have you ever stumbled when you walked? Have you ever tried to walk with your shoelaces tied together? It doesn't work very well, does it? I remember when I was a youth pastor back in the day, I had this really fun, probably unwise thing that I did with my students, where I took saran wrap. This is a game I made up. And I took saran wrap, industrial saran wrap, and I put their arms down to their sides, and I saran wrapped them all the way around, like all the way up. So it was from their ankles to their necks. And I didn't think about the fact that if they fell on their face, they couldn't catch themselves. But nonetheless, we put them in a line and made them race. They chose it, okay? I didn't force it on them. But they got to race, and it was hilarious to watch them try and move, like little penguins, and their arms were tied down, and it's impossible. And Solomon says, if you experience that in life, as you kind of walk through life and you just feel hampered in every step of the way, like your shoelaces are tied together, you're tripping over yourself. Do you know why that's happening? Because you chose not to be wise. Because wisdom has the opposite effect on people. Wisdom enables us to walk on straight paths that are unencumbered. They're unencumbered. Wisdom will take us where we want to go in life. And where do you want to go? I don't know exactly where you want to go, but my guess is you want to leave a good legacy behind you. And if you want to do that, he says, you got to run with wisdom. He goes on, verse 13, he says, hold on to instruction, don't let it go, hold on for dear life, guard it well, for it is your life. The implication being you can't choose to be wise once and hope that turns your life around. Just like you can't, eat a salad once. We talked about this last week. I can't eat a salad tonight and hope to drop 50 pounds tomorrow. If I want to lose weight, I got to get on a regimen. I've got to be committed. I got to make sure that I'm going to follow through with it. And the same is true with wisdom. Making one wise choice will be beneficial to you in that moment, but it won't be beneficial over your lifetime. It's got to be a decision over and over and over and over again. So he says, my son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Please pay attention. And don't just pay attention, he would say. He says, do not let them out of your sight. Because if you let them out of your sight, it's going to be a disaster, kind of like a toddler. Our 10-month-old, if you let him out of your sight right now, he's all over the place, right? I mean, because it will get away from you. Do not let them out of your sight. And then he says, keep them within your heart. For they are life. They are life to those who find them and health to one's whole body. Now, the heart from a Jewish mindset was the kind of the place where your moral compass lives. It's the place where your moral compass is. It's where your spiritual life originates. It's where everything about you comes, your decisions, your actions, your facial expressions, your emotions. It all comes from deep within your heart. It impacts everything about you. And so he says, keep wisdom, keep wisdom, keep wisdom. And you may say, okay, you've said it like 30 times, Seth. Solomon, you've said it 50 times. Seth only read half of them, right? I mean, we get it. Why are you saying this so much? And here's his point, and this is why it's so important. You will not accidentally find yourself becoming or being wise. You have to choose wisdom. And Solomon's point is that choosing wisdom is the wisest thing that you could do with your life. Choosing to be wise and making that decision and rearranging your life so that wisdom is at the center of it is the best thing that you could possibly do. Which means if you know somebody who's wise, whether it's a parent or a grandparent or some friend or a crazy uncle, not crazy, but wise uncle, a teacher, a coach, neighbor, whatever, whoever it is, they didn't get there by accident. Nobody becomes wise by accident. It is a deliberate choice to say, I'm going to center my life around understanding, experiencing the world, gaining knowledge from that experience, and allowing it to lead me to better judgments. And you know the good news? That means you and I can choose it too. If other people can choose wisdom, so can we. And you don't have to be smart. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to come from a great family background. You don't have even had to make wise choices in the past. From this point forward, you can choose wisdom. In fact, if you look back at your life and you look at the decisions that you made, and when I talked about being hampered and straight-jacketed in life, and that feels like your life, the good news is it doesn't have to continue being your life. I think we've all had moments in life like that when we felt like we were hampered every step of the way. We all have. But the option and the opportunity for us is today to choose wisdom. Teenagers, I'm telling you, the best thing you could do right now in your life is to make a decision to say, I'm going to choose wisdom regardless of what my friends are doing. You may have unwise parents, you may have really unwise friends, but you can choose to be wise. It might involve not hanging out with those unwise friends as much. It might involve giving up some Friday nights or giving up a spring break, whatever. But you can choose wisdom, and that would be the wisest thing you could ever do. Now you ask the question, okay, I get it. I'm supposed to be wise. How do I even do that? Because it's this ethereal, kind of hard to grasp. It's like air. I mean, how do you get a hold of it? Well, Solomon gives us some really good handles for it, and I think this is so good. He says this, verse 23. He says, above all else, in other words, more than anything you do in your life, if you want to be wise, he says, guard your heart. If you want to be wise, guard your heart. Now, I realize that we Americans, when we hear that, I mean, I think about all the love songs I grew up with, right? Because that's hard, right? It's all the mushy-gushy love songs like Billy Ray Cyrus. Remember him? Don't break my. Good. I mean, that was better than Greensburg. Let's see how you do with the next one. Elton John, don't go breaking my heart. I won't go. That was a little better. Or Backstreet Boys, quit playing games with. Oh my gosh. See, Dan, he's like, you've got to sing those lines. They'll love it. They'll sing back to you. He's a big liar. Don't believe anything Dan tells you. I mean, that's the lesson of the day. No, look, here's the thing. The term heart, I mean, we apply it to the emotions, love and all that good stuff. Solomon wasn't thinking about the heart in those terms because that's not how the Jewish people thought of the heart. It is the place in you from which everything emanates. Your words, your thoughts, your actions, everything. The motives of your heart drive everything about you. And so he says, above all else, you need to guard that thing for everything, not some or most, but everything you do flows from it. So you got to guard it and you got to protect it and you've got to be careful about what gets inside of it because once it gets lodged in there, it begins commanding your actions. It begins commanding your thoughts. It begins driving your behavior. And so he says, you've got to learn how to monitor it. You've got to learn how to monitor it because it commands every piece of your life. It is the underlying cause of everything. That's what the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, understood. Which means when you're in an argument with somebody and some words come out and you're not really sure where they came from, do you know where they came from? Your heart. And you want to point to them and be like, you brought this out of me. Well, it couldn't have come out of you if it weren't in there in the first place. It comes from your heart. When you feel jealousy of what somebody else has or what somebody else gets to do or the life that they're living, do you know where that jealousy originates? In here. It originates in here. When you feel anger, it all comes down to here. When you fixate on something and you just can't move off of it and it is just driving everything you think about, it comes down to here. When you want something so badly, it all comes down to your heart. And so Solomon says, look, if you want to get wisdom, if you want to think about living a life that's worth living, an adventure worth living, a legacy worth living, then you've got to learn to guard your heart. Do you know what a guard does? A guard restricts access. A guard restricts access and says, you can't come in here. I'm protecting this. And so the invitation for you and the invitation for me is that if we want to have wisdom, we need to begin guarding our hearts. Now, the problem is most of the time when you're walking through your path of life and you're making a decision and you come to this crossroads, you're thinking about, is this good or bad? Is it right or wrong? How close to sin can I tiptoe up to it without walking over the edge? I mean, which is just kind of a dumb question or question to ask or way to look at it, but I do it too. You're like the impulse. I mean, we're just kind of dealing with all those things and we're not thinking about. But the real question, what Solomon says we need to be asking is, what does this do to my heart? What will this choice do to my heart? If I walk down this path, will it lead me to a place of jealousy? If I walk down this path, will it lead me to a place of anger? If I walk down this path, what is it going to do inside of me? Is it going to lead me to a place of lust where I begin thinking about women differently or whatever it is differently? Is this leading me to the place where I want to go? What will it do to my heart? And if it's going to do something inside my heart that isn't going to be beneficial for me, then I need to make the decision to say, no. No, I'm not going to do that because I recognize it's doing something and my conscience is pricked. I realize I can't put my head on my pillow at night and feel good about what it is that I've done. Now, the problem for most of us is that we don't ask that question before we make our decisions. And sometimes decisions are made for us that we had nothing to do with. And so one of the best practices that you and I could get into is the practice of monitoring our hearts. Because sometimes we've made a decision and something got lodged down in there and we don't know what to do with it. And so there's a practice that you can begin and I can begin doing at the end of the day is to ask a very important question. And that question is, how is my heart? How is my heart? One of the best practices for you, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're not a follower of Jesus, the first thing you should do is start following Jesus. But if you already are, one of the best practices you can do is spend some time every day asking that question at the end of the day, how is my heart? Because when you get to the end of the day, you realize you lived life accidentally in many cases, and you don't realize everything that you've gone through and everything that you've experienced and how it has impacted everything that's going on in here. And so before you put your head on the pillow and spending a couple minutes and saying, how is my heart? Is there somebody who hurt you? and you're holding on to that anger, and you found it incredibly hard to forgive that person, if you spend some time monitoring your heart, you'll begin to discover that. Is there somebody you hurt and you haven't asked for forgiveness and you haven't allowed that relationship to move forward? If you spend some time monitoring your heart, you'll begin discovering that. Did you make a choice in your life that led you to undue financial stress or just undue stress as a family? Spend some time monitoring your heart and you'll discover. Is there jealousy? Is there pride that's keeping you from seeing the world the way you need to see it and life the way you need to see it? Is there bitterness? What's going on in your heart? And you've got to be honest with yourself, because I can't answer that question for you. I don't know what's going on in your heart. Only you know the answer. And you may not want to do this, and you may say, I don't have time to do this, and I get that, but if you want to be wise, Solomon said you may have to rearrange things in your life in order to be wise. You may have to spend time that you don't necessarily want to spend. If you want to get it, though, you can get it. And it'll take some effort, and it'll take some time. And you may discover, I've got something lodged in there, and I can't get it out. I need help from somebody else. I need somebody to pray with me. But one of the values we have at our church is community groups, so that we can go through life together and pray for each other and encourage each other and help one another go through life. If you're not in a community group, we would love to help you figure out how you can be a part of one. On your tear-off on your bulletin, you can sign up and come talk to me or John. We'd love to get you connected. The point is that we need to be monitoring our hearts, and sometimes we need a group of people around us to help us do that. See, Solomon, as he continued on in this proverb, he got to the verse that I've been trying to get you to memorize for the last couple of weeks, verse 26, where he says, ponder the path of your feet. Ponder the path of your feet, and then all your ways will be sure. But in order to ponder, it takes time. In order to monitor your heart, you're going to have to ponder. You're going to have to take time. You're going to have to see what's going on the inside. But when you do, he says, ponder the path of your feet, and then all your ways, all your paths will be sure. In fact, we got a few more, I think, of these window clings at guest services. If you didn't get one, make sure you grab one to learn it and memorize it and let it sink in, because I want you to get to the end of your life, and I want to get to the end of my life and say, that was a life worth living. I left a legacy that was worth leaving. But I'll get there when I ponder the path of my feet by monitoring and guarding the piece of me that directs every aspect of my life. And if you want to get there, if you want to be wise, you've got to make the decision to ask yourself that question. And it's not a one-time question. It's something we do on a daily basis. But you got to choose to live life intentionally, because when you begin monitoring your heart and you begin looking inside and you realize, hey, there's something in here that I don't want in there. Hey, it's leading me down a bad path, then I need to make a course correction. I need to move onto a different path. And when you do that, and when you get to the end of your life and your time of funeral comes, people will look at you and they'll look at the legacy you left behind and they'll say, that was a life worth living. That was a life worth living. We're having all kinds of tech stuff today. That's all right. Don't worry about it. Just forget all that. That was a life worth living. That person, he was so full of joy. She was so full of peace. The self-control that he exhibited, the patience that she had. It doesn't come accidentally. It comes when we choose wisdom, and we do that by monitoring our hearts and pondering the path of our feet. So this morning, as we close our time together, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that. In fact, we'll put the question back on the screen. How is my heart? How is my heart? I don't know if you've spent time asking yourself that question. And so this morning, don't let this be the only time you ask the question, but we'll do it here just for a minute so you can just practice. I want to invite you to ask the question, how is my heart? How is your heart? How is your heart? In fact, if you would just kind of entertain me by closing your eyes and bowing your heads, and quiet your spirit for a minute, because we live in a society with so much noise around us. And in the quietness of these minutes, would you just think about that? How is your heart? How is my heart? What's going on in there? Is there someone who hurt you and you're having a hard time forgiving? Is there someone you've hurt and you need to ask for forgiveness? Are you jealous? Is there something you need to celebrate? That's how we get rid of jealousy. Do you feel bitter? Have you recently made a decision that put your family in undue stress or put you and your life in undue stress? Is there any pride that has kept you from seeing life the way you need to see it? Have you been greedy rather than generous? Did God prick your conscience sometime in the last week and you ignored it? Whatever has come to your mind, would you just take a minute? I'm going to give you about 20 seconds. And would you invite God into the space of that? If there's someone you need to forgive, ask him to help you through his power to forgive. If there's someone who's made you jealous, would you ask him in his power to give you the strength to celebrate what God's doing in their lives? Whatever it is, would you bring it before him and hold it before him and ask him to give you wisdom to guard your heart? And in just a moment, I will pray to close our time this morning. Heavenly Father, would you take these things that you have brought before us, these things that we are holding in our hearts, and would you help us to release them to you? And would you step in and help us in ways that we need to be helped, and when we're having a hard time forgiving, help us to forgive. When there's pain and we just need you to walk through it with us, would you be present in our lives? God, as we think about wisdom, would you help each one of us to put wisdom in the center of our lives and to move in that direction? And as we think about choices we make, help us to ponder the path of our feet and help us to monitor our hearts in the process to see how our decisions are impacting who we are at our core. God, give each one of us wisdom to know what we need to do with what you've given to us today. Thank you for your goodness to us. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.